Hi everyone, welcome back to Alice and the Giant Bookshelf. Today's video is all about Agatha Christie's favourite Agatha Christie books. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you are new. My name's Alice and I have way too many books, and if you've been here for a little while you'll know that I am a huge fan of Agatha Christie, and I have been for quite some time. I will link my playlist of previous Agatha Christie videos up here so that you can go and see it, and it will be in the description box down below as well if you are interested in Agatha Christie content. I have made a few videos relating to the Queen of Crime. Agatha Christie's birthday is coming up this week, and Agatha Christie was born on the 15th of September 1890. In Agatha Christie's hometown of Torquay, every year there is the International Christie Festival taking place in the week of her birthday usually. So this year it runs from the 8th to the 17th of September, and I have never actually attended this event, but my booktube equivalent of the International Agatha Christie Festival, to celebrate this in my own little way, I like to make videos about Agatha Christie in this particular week in September. To celebrate Agatha Christie's birthday, I'm hoping to have 2 videos for you this week, all about something to do with Agatha Christie. Any excuse for an Agatha Christie video, really. The first one today is going to be looking at Agatha Christie's own favourite Agatha Christie books and whether they're favourites for me as well. I thought we would compare our lists a little bit. Later in the week, hopefully on Agatha Christie's actual birthday, I'm hoping to do my Agatha Christie shelf tour. Now, I did ask some time ago on the community tab whether anyone would be interested in seeing my Agatha Christie book collection, and pretty much everybody said yes, but I then have procrastinated, and I thought it would actually be a really nice thing to save for Agatha Christie's birthday. I do have several Agatha Christie shelves behind me here, so they start at the very top there, and so this shelf is the second shelf down. You can't see that one either, but I will show them to you in that video. This is the third shelf down, also Agatha Christie. Then we have a fourth shelf. This one's full of Poirot. The one next to it carries on the Poirot and goes into Miss Marple. Then we have the Agatha Christie graphic novels, and on the bottom shelf down there we have the rest of Christie. Continues on from the Marple shelf into the standalones, but that is for another day. That's the sneaky peek at what is coming up. Without any further ado, I recently found online, I think I have seen it before, but I read again a list that Agatha Christie herself put out of what were her current, at that time, which was 1972 I believe, her favourite of her own books. And I really enjoy reading things like this because it's so interesting to me to know about authors' creative processes and what it is that they have particularly liked in their own books. I think it's a fascinating topic. I've pulled the books that Agatha Christie mentions in this article off my shelf, and I will be talking about them today. If you want to read this article about Agatha Christie's 10 favourite books, you can see this on the official Agatha Christie website. She said that her own 10 would vary from time to time. I think we can all identify with that as readers, how top 10s can fluctuate and change completely over time. At that time, in 1972, Agatha Christie's own list included, the first book on her list was And Then There Were None. Now, I think most Agatha Christie fans would select this as their favourite Agatha Christie of all time. And for me, it's a very close second. And sometimes it's third, but I'll explain that in a minute when I get to another book. So, And Then There Were None is probably Christie's most famous work, and I can really understand why this would be one of her own favourites. I think if you were Christie, you would be well entitled to be really proud of this book, because it's a book in which 10 strangers end up sort of cut off on an island, and they start to get murdered. I think that this book is just such a clever accomplishment. I've reread this and it stands up to a reread. I've watched a play of this. The play is really good as well. I've watched an adaptation. My opinion of this doesn't really change. I still think it's really, really clever. I've actually even played a computer game of this one on, I think, the Nintendo Wii. Didn't get very far because I'm not very good at computer games. But anyway, this is pretty much widely agreed to be Christie's masterpiece. If you were only going to read one Agatha Christie in your lifetime, I think that this would be a wise choice because it's so widely agreed to be her best. Now, just because something is someone's absolute best piece of writing doesn't always mean that it's my favourite. So this always comes in second on my lists, but certainly would make any top 10 that I would ever make of Agatha Christie books. So completely understand her inclusion of this on her own top 10. Oh, and Christie said of And Then There Were None that it was a difficult technique which was a challenge, and so I enjoyed it and I think I dealt with it satisfactorily. So I think that that's just so understated. Satisfactorily. She dealt with it so much more than satisfactorily in my eyes. Utterly agree with Christie on that one. A second one that she mentions on her list is The Murder of Roger Ackroyd. Now, she doesn't really go any further in describing this book. She just says it's a general favourite. Again, I think that a lot of people would bring this book up, and it is brought up time and time again as an example of Christie at her cleverest. So I can see why she would be really proud of this. It's one I want to reread really, really soon. I have a really positive memory of The Murder of Roger Ackroyd, and I've always thought of it as one of my favourites, and I did include it in my top 12 Poirot books. However, when I look back on my reading journal, I was actually quite annoyed by this book, but I think that that can only be a good thing. If it inspires strong feelings in you, then I think that you're dealing with a really good book. I would love to reread this again really soon because I think it warrants a reread, and I will be looking for the clues because this is such a memorable solution in this one that I would not be able to forget that and put it aside. I completely understand this being on Agatha Christie's own favourites. Third book on the list is another favourite of mine. This would be one of my favourite Miss Marples. Probably not my top favourite, but certainly close to that, and that's A Murder Is Announced. I have a really old cover of this one which I like. Christie said of this one, I thought all the characters interesting to write about, and I felt I knew them quite well by the time the book was finished. This is one where I would absolutely agree with Christie that this has great characters in it. I really did enjoy this one. Back in the day, I didn't really enjoy the Marple books as much as the Poirot books, but I can see that this one shines out as a really good Marple. It doesn't have an awful lot of Miss Marple in it, but the other characters in it are really, really great to follow anyway. I agree on this one as well. It's certainly one of her very, very good books. This one is a little bit less famous than the other two, so I will say something about it. A Murder Is Announced centres around an announcement in a paper that reads, a murder is announced and will take place on Friday the 29th of October at Little Paddocks at 6:30 p.m. Friends, please accept this, the only imitation. I love the concept of this notice in the paper announcing a murder. Some people do turn up at Little Paddocks for this murder that has been announced, and of course murder occurs. The next one that Christie mentions is another favourite for me and the first Agatha Christie I ever read, and it's Murder on the Orient Express. Christie said that she liked this one because it was a new idea for a plot. I really, really like the setup of this book. I really, really love Poirot in this book, and it has a huge nostalgia factor for me as the first Christie I read. So if you are new here, I read this in approximately 2006. I can still vividly remember being in the crime section of the local library that I lived near at the time and deciding it's time I read Agatha Christie. I was getting really into crime fiction and I had heard that Christie was one of the greats. So I picked up Murder on the Orient Express first, I think because it was probably the one that I'd heard of. And I think I read about 7 more Christie books that month because I just couldn't put it down and I couldn't put the next one down. This is really, really high on my list. I think I put this in 3rd when I did my overall top 10 of Agatha Christie. And since I've reread this one and reread And Then There Were None, I would say that this one probably just pipped And Then There Were None when I reread them both. But I mean, that could change on a different day. So this is usually either 2nd or 3rd in my rankings of Christie. Would certainly be top 10. Absolutely love this. Poirot ends up stranded on a train in a snowdrift. The train being, of course, the eponymous Orient Express. A passenger is murdered. Poirot is called in to help and he has to solve a closed circle mystery and work out who that is trapped on the train is a murderer. So love this one, agree with Christie. Next, Christie selected The 13 Problems and said it was a good series of stories. I agree with Christie, this would be up there with my favourite Marples. Again, not my absolute favourite. And it's always hard to compare short stories to long form, but these are my favourite Marple short stories. I think this is a really good collection. I love the idea of it, and the idea of it is about people telling stories to Miss Marple. Call themselves the Tuesday Night Club. Marple and some friends, acquaintances meet and they tell each other some unsolved mysteries, pretty much all of which I think Marple then proceeds to solve without investigating. It's a really, really good one. Probably wouldn't be in my overall top 10 of all of her books, and in fact it wasn't when I made that video, but it would certainly be in my top sort of 5 Marple books. So yeah, good one. Now, the rest that Christie picks, there is one more Marple featuring in this top 10. The rest are all standalones. The next one is Towards Zero, and this I have fond memories of as one of my favourite standalones. Towards Zero is an interesting concept because it works back. It doesn't start from the murder, it starts before the murder and works towards it. So I really, really like that concept, and Christie herself said that she found it interesting to work on the idea of people from different places coming towards a murder instead of starting with the murder and working from that. So yeah, I think that's the concept I've just clumsily explained. This is another one that it's high time I reread, but yeah, I remember having a really, really good time with it. An excellent standalone in my eyes. And I do believe I included that in my top 10 Christie's as well. Don't remember the murderer in this one, so I can't wait to reread it because I love it when that happens. Next up is Endless Night. This is possibly one of the only ones I disagree with Christie. I didn't personally enjoy Endless Night when I read it, but I think Christie is entitled obviously to her opinion, which was that it was her own favourite at that present time. And with that present time being 1972, I wondered if it was because it was quite a recent book that she'd written, and this was published in 1967, so that theory may or may not work. But yes, this one I think has a really promising premise, and it's one where Christie sort of brings in a little bit of a supernatural element, which she sometimes does, and that supernatural element is usually really well explained in terms of reality as well. It's not like magical realism or anything, it's just a sort of spooky vibe. So this is a very dark Christie book, and it's certainly got spooky vibes. A good book to read in October, I would say. Even though it's not a favourite for me, I can see that this book is quite divisive. I think a lot of people would love it. I don't personally, but this involves a man designing a perfect house for his beautiful wife, but where they've built the house is supposedly cursed, and there have supposedly been sudden deaths there before. So the plot develops from there. There is a very sort of macabre, sort of tense atmosphere in this book. I think I can see what Christie liked about her own writing in this one without personally loving it. So that's my thoughts on Endless Night. The next one on Christie's list was Crooked House, and I have read, I think it's even in the front of Crooked House, that this was a book that Christie had wanted to write for a really long time, I think, and that she really, really enjoyed writing. I've definitely read before, possibly even in her autobiography, but I could be wrong, that this was a personal favourite for her in terms of it really enjoying writing it. And she says in this top 10, I found a study of a certain family interesting to explore. So this one really is a very small group of suspects, family murder mystery. So the head of the household, Aristotle Leonidas, I think his name is murdered. He's the grandfather of the house. And there are, of course, all of the family as suspects. This is the sort of book that you feel like a detective could have been called in to solve this mystery, and Christie could well have used any one of her detectives, I think. I think this would have worked as a Poirot or a Miss Marple, but I'm actually really glad that she wrote it as a standalone. Maybe that contributed to her enjoyment in writing it. I don't know, but it's a deliciously good mystery. Again, it's very dark. I think Crooked House is one that a lot of people would recommend. I would recommend it. I don't think it's in my actual top 10. I have reread this since I made that top 10, but I still don't think it's quite in there. It probably would reach my top 20 though, easily. You can almost feel Christie's enjoyment in writing it when you read this book, if you're looking for it. I can see why she had a really good time with this one. Next up, not a very interesting book to hold up because I don't have the dust jacket, but Ordeal by Innocence was another one that Christie picked, and this is another standalone, and Christie said of it, an idea I had for some time before starting to work on it. This is another one of her sort of family mysteries. It's very centred around a family. As it states in the title, Ordeal by Innocence, this one looks at innocence and guilt and the family dynamics around that, I would say. Of course there are murders, and there's like a sort of outcast from the family element to it as well. When I read this, I actually read this one in Devon when visiting lots of Agatha Christie things, and it was ideal for that. I think that Christie, although she fictionalises it, does have Devon in mind when writing this, and there were certain locations that crop up in it that I believe I read in a book that I read at the time as well, which was called Agatha Christie at Home, I think. It was all about Agatha Christie's different houses and homes that she's had. It did say that something that's at Greenway, which you can visit because it's a National Trust property, was in Ordeal by Innocence. A really good one. Probably enjoyed it even more because I read it in Devon. This one, again, I have probably forgotten enough details to read it again as though it was a new one, so that's good. Finally, we only have one left, and this was one that surprises me a little bit, but Christie's reasoning is pretty solid because I do this as well. So Christie said that she had reread this lately and enjoyed reading it again very much. This is the sort of thing that I do. My favourite is the last one that I've read quite often. Her final position, I don't think these were in any particular order, just to note that, was another Marple book, The Moving Finger. Now, The Moving Finger centres around a town where there is a spate of poison pen letters. I really enjoyed like the main protagonist in this, which isn't actually Marple. In a lot of Marple books, Marple is kind of a character who comes into it later or takes a bit of a backseat at first, then swoops in and solves the crime generally. So I did like the people at the centre of this mystery. This one had a really good mystery at the heart of it, a really good puzzle. I now can't remember who did it in this one either, so it's prime for a reread. This would almost certainly make my top 10 Marple. There's a lot of Marples that I sort of really enjoyed without them being absolute favourites, so The Moving Finger sort of falls into that category for me, but it's always interesting to hear that Christie reread it and really liked it. That was Agatha Christie's top 10 books. I hope you've enjoyed hearing me chat about some of Christie's favourite of her own books and whether I thought that they were favourites or not. If you would like to see more Christie content, do let me know. Any further suggestions for content on Christie would be welcome. As I've said, there will be more Christie stuff coming later this week. Please do leave your comments down below. Do you love any of these 10 Agatha Christies? Which was your favourite out of these? Or do you have a favourite that was not mentioned? My favourite that was not mentioned is of course Five Little Pigs, which I've talked about often on my channel. I just really admire the mystery in that one and the way Poirot sort of goes back to a cold case and solves it. I think this one is so clever, and especially clever in the way that Christie draws the characters. That's all from me today. If you have enjoyed this video, please do give it a like. Please do consider subscribing if you haven't already. I will hope very much to see you all again soon for another video all about books here on Alice and the Giant Bookshelf. Bye for now.